The lake was quiet that morning, sunlight bouncing across the ripples while birds sang from the tall pines. Daniel, a retired federal prosecutor, sat on the porch of his family's old cabin sipping coffee. To most, it looked like a peaceful retreat. But that cabin had become more than a getaway. It was his war room. Daniel had been asked by neighbors to represent them in a growing conflict with the local HOA. Stories of harassment, unjust fines, and invasive demands had spread across the lakeside community. And at the heart of it all was one woman, Karen Douglas, the self-appointed queen of the HOA board. Daniel had seen plenty of arrogance in his career, but Karen had a special brand of it, relentless, loud, and convinced of her own power. She had fined a veteran for flying the U.S. flag, forced an elderly widow to repaint her cabin 3 times, and even demanded children stop fishing on the shore because it disturbed her view. That morning, Daniel wasn't alone. Inside the cabin sat U.S. District Judge Evelyn Carter, a longtime colleague. She had agreed to visit quietly, off the record, to review the stack of complaints against the HOA. Her involvement meant this wasn't just another petty neighborhood dispute. It was shaping into a federal case. But as Daniel prepared to walk, back inside, a truck door slammed down the hill. The sound of hurried, angry footsteps on the gravel cut through the morning calm. And then, before Daniel could react, the front door burst open. Karen had arrived. What happens when the most arrogant HOA leader storms into a cabin without realizing a U.S. district judge is waiting inside? From where are you watching this video? Tell us in the comments, and if you also have a story, then share it and share your experiences, and always be happy. Karen didn't knock. She stormed in, her sunglasses perched high and her phone clutched like a weapon. "Daniel!" she snapped. "I told you, you can't hold unauthorized meetings on this property. As HOA president, I demand you explain." "Yourself!" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "This is my family cabin, Karen. You have no jurisdiction here." "Everything in this neighborhood falls under my jurisdiction," she barked. She strutted into the living room, flipping through papers on the table without asking. But as she moved closer, her eyes fell on the woman sitting calmly in the armchair. Judge Carter had been silent, observing. Karen paused. "And who are you?" "Judge." Carter's voice was steady but firm. "Evelyn Carter, U.S. District Judge." The color drained from Karen's face for just a moment before she recovered. "Well, I don't care if you're the Queen of England," Karen scoffed. "This is HOA business, and outsiders have no right to meddle." Daniel almost smiled. He had seen criminals talk themselves into worse trouble, but watching Karen dig her own hole in front of a federal judge was something else entirely. Judge Carter glanced at Daniel, then back at Karen. "On the contrary," she said, "this HOA business has reached a level where federal oversight is being considered. You may want to choose your next words carefully." Karen's lips tightened, but she didn't back down. Instead, she leaned closer to Daniel. "You think you can scare me with a guest in your cabin? Just wait. I'll have the HOA board here in minutes and we'll shut you down for good." Karen just challenged a federal judge without even realizing the consequences. What will happen when the HOA board joins the confrontation? Karen's threats echoed as she pulled out her phone, calling fellow board members. Meanwhile, Judge Carter motioned to the thick folders on the table. "Let's review while we still have peace," she said. Inside those folders were horror stories, photos of overgrown lawns fined at $500 a day, letters threatening foreclosure over late fees of just $20, and even testimony from residents who claimed Karen had trespassed onto their property to inspect compliance. Daniel flipped to one particularly damning case, an elderly woman named Mrs. Halpern, fined repeatedly for keeping a small garden of wildflowers. The photos showed her crying as workers hired by the HOA ripped the plants from the soil. Judge Carter's expression hardened. "This isn't about neighborhood upkeep. This is intimidation." Karen returned, smug. "My board is on their way. You'll regret ever..." She stopped short when Judge Carter held up the file. "Did you personally authorize these fines?" the judge asked. Karen crossed her arms. "Of course. It's my job to enforce order." Daniel leaned forward. "Or abuse power," Karen scoffed. "Call it what you want. These people signed contracts. I hold them accountable. If they don't like it, they can leave." Judge Carter closed the file slowly. "And yet, you may be the one leaving, in handcuffs." Karen is doubling down, but the judge has only just begun uncovering the HOA's abuses. What happens when the rest of the board arrives? Soon, 3 SUVs pulled up the gravel drive. Out stepped Karen's allies, Mr. Dodd, the treasurer, Mrs. Lane, the secretary, and a smug-looking man in a blazer who introduced himself as the HOA's attorney. Karen strutted toward them like a general leading her army. "This meeting is illegal. We're shutting it down." Daniel remained calm. "This isn't your meeting, and you might want to hear what Judge Carter has to say before you embarrass yourselves further." The board members chuckled dismissively, but the attorney's smile faltered at the word judge. He glanced at Judge Carter and shifted uneasily. "Wait, are you actually—" "Yes," Judge Carter interrupted. "And I've been reviewing your HOA's practices. Some of what I've seen borders on racketeering." A silence swept the room. Karen hissed, "Don't listen to her scare tactics. We're in control here." But the treasurer, Mr. Dodd, looked nervous. "Karen, if this is serious federal oversight—" "Silence," Karen snapped. "I run this HOA, not some stranger." Daniel leaned back, letting the cracks in their alliance widen. He had learned long ago that the arrogant often self-destructed when confronted with authority. The HOA board is splitting, and the judge is turning up the pressure. But Karen isn't done fighting yet. Judge Carter opened another file, laying it on the table for all to see. "This is a foreclosure order your HOA attempted to push through on a family over unpaid fines totaling less than $200. You threatened to seize their home." Mrs. Lane gasped. "Karen, you never told us that." Karen's jaw tightened. "They broke the rules. It's that simple." Daniel spoke softly, but his words cut sharp. "No, Karen, it's abuse. And you've dragged your board into liability. With you." The attorney shifted uncomfortably. "If federal charges are being considered, we need to reassess our—" Karen slammed her hand on the table. "No, we are not backing down. This is my HOA." Judge Carter stood, her presence commanding. "That's where you're wrong. This community doesn't belong to you. And if even half of these reports are accurate, you've crossed into criminal misconduct." Karen's defiance wavered, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. She sneered at Daniel. "You think you've won? I'll ruin you. I'll have you banned from every property meeting. You'll regret ever stepping in." Daniel didn't flinch. "Karen, you already lost. You just don't realize it yet." Karen's grip is slipping, but her pride is keeping her reckless. What final mistake will push her over the edge? As Judge Carter gathered her files, Karen suddenly lunged forward, grabbing at the papers. "You can't take those! They're HOA property!" Daniel stepped between them. "Back off, Karen!" But Karen wasn't listening. Her voice rose into a shriek. "This is a conspiracy! You're all against me! I built this HOA from nothing, and I'll burn it down before I let you take it!" Her outburst silenced everyone. Even her own board members stepped back, horrified. Mrs. Lane whispered, "She's lost it." Judge Carter calmly pulled out her phone. "Thank you, Ms. Douglas. You've just given me grounds for immediate action." She dialed the sheriff's office. Karen froze. You wouldn't dare." Daniel locked eyes with her. "You should have walked away, Karen. Instead, you walked into the one cabin you couldn't control." Karen's meltdown has finally crossed the line. But what will happen when law enforcement arrives? Minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived at the cabin. They spoke briefly with Judge Carter, reviewed the evidence, and turned to Karen. "Ma'am," one deputy said, "you're under investigation for harassment, intimidation, and unlawful threats of foreclosure. You'll need to come with us. Karen's bravado crumbled. No, you can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. The deputy's reply was calm but firm. Not anymore. As Karen was escorted out, her board members looked shaken. Mr. Dodd turned to Daniel. We didn't know it was this bad. What happens now? Judge Carter gathered her files. Now, this HOA faces federal review, but more importantly, this community will finally get justice. Daniel walked Judge Carter to her car, the calm of the lake slowly returning. He knew the fight wasn't over. Legal cases took time, but the tide had turned. And all because Karen's arrogance led her to storm into the wrong cabin, on the wrong day, in front of the wrong person. Sometimes the downfall of the powerful begins with their own arrogance and ends with justice knocking at the door.